Welcome back to the blind zone. What is the blind zone? It's something that happens all of a sudden that you never saw coming, or it's something that you refuse to see that was right in front of your face. And if you'll indulge me for a minute before I invite my guest in today to talk about our topic, I do want to tell you that doing the blind zone has been a great learning experience for me. But unfortunately, some of the things I've done along the way haven't been as smooth as I would have liked. Like the auditory and sometimes the visual content hasn't been what I wanted. And so I want you to know that I understand this and I'm trying to clear it up as I go. Like the audio part, the content is great. Sometimes the volume's too low, or in the visual, when I interviewed Pastor Hewitt, I should have stopped that and fixed the problem, but I didn't know until it was too late. So again, I just ask for your indulgence that this is a work in progress. I'm trying to do the best I can, and I have some great people that are helping me. And unfortunately, I have bought so many clickers that just don't seem to work all the time. So that's why my poor guests have to come in, turn on the video, and then come sit down and then get up and go shut it off because the equipment doesn't always work 100%. So again, that was just my way of saying thanks for understanding that I'm a work in progress and that I want this to go as smoothly as possible. And it just means that I learn as I go. So, all that being said, now let me introduce you to my good friend Cindy. She was our very first guest on the Blind Zone, and we did one on advice. So I'll have her come in, she'll sit down, and then I'll tell you the topic we're going to talk about.
Hello, Denise.
Hi, Cindy. Today's topic is it's going to be nerve wracking for both of us, so just so you know, and it's on margins. What is a margin? Why margins are important? What happens if you don't have margins, and how to know that you're building in the best margin. So I'm kidding Cindy all the time because she's so busy. She doesn't have a calendar. She has a clock. So everything is like, timed out to the minute. So, but I have the opposite problem that I have so much margin that it's like, well, I can do anything and I don't get anything accomplished. So anyway, thanks for coming on.
Thanks
And
for having me.
this is your second go round. The first
It
one was on
is.
advice and that was super fun.
That was fun.
And this one's going to be less fun.
This is a whole lot less fun because you're pointing things out to me that I don't want to listen to.
Yeah, I know that's well, and I told you the whole time this whole adventure with the blind zone. Every time I say it, it's like I didn't know I really believed that until it fell out of my mouth.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm grateful for the learning curve, but
Yes.
sometimes it's still painful. So what do you think a margin is? When you hear the word margin, we all think of the white space around a paper that you're handing in, but how do you what would you define a margin as?
Well, my first thought was always going to the profit margin. you know, this is how much you make. This is how much you have spent on making that product, and what you sell it for is the difference. So it's kind of that way with everything, in my opinion. That you you look at things and say, what area that you're devoting or taking away from, or whatever that is, that margin, that area, that white space, if you will, is what a margin is to me.
Okay, and I guess I hadn't really even thought about it as far as profit, but for me, I was thinking about it in biblical terms,
Mm-hmm.
and God said, "I'm going to build in a margin." So every seventh day or the Sabbath day, you're going to do things that you're going to rest, and you're not going to continue to do the things you did on the other 6 days.
Correct.
And so we built that in, but people don't honor the Sabbath anymore. It's like, that's just silly. I can get so much more done if I just, incorporate that seventh day into it. And even Jesus, he went away by himself to a lonely place and prayed. And you would have to figure that if the Son of God had to take the time to do that, that we ought to have that kind of in our framework as well. But I don't think we do that as well these days.
Well, that should tell you a great deal about where I fall. The
Wait,
way
wait.
I looked at that whole situation It was, and I was thinking about this a lot, about how we were going to approach this thing, and and that's really the way that I view things and have for so many, many, many years, because I've been in the business world for so many, many, many years. And so I thought, I used to kid all the time at work that if you if you couldn't find me, you can't fire me kind of situation. So I would keep so busy and so just running, running, running all the time. And we would just laugh about those things. But in hindsight, it helped frame my point of view when it comes to these margins and the fact that I have to fill up every second of every single day. I'm not getting as, let's see, what is a good word for that? I'm not
Yeah,
even
I'm wait. I
sure what
can't
that
even wait
word
to hear the
is.
rest of it, because at first I thought you
Yeah.
were saying that you were like Jesus, and I'm
Oh,
like,
no, no,
now
no.
let me say, Cindy, I don't think that's
No,
right.
no.
So how do you finish that sentence?
Uh, that's a good question, and that's probably the reason we're having this conversation is because we really, I know I need to build in so much, or build in some margin, because I think, I know you've heard this term many, many times, is that, the idle hands are the devil's workshop, right? And I took that to heart for many, many, many years. But then on the other side of it, I thought of last night is be still and know that I am God. So my mixture there has been all on one side. I'm just go, 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 and filling in every waking moment with something that I felt like I was being productive in the business world. So that's kind of the way that I was looking at life. Then when I retired, it didn't stop.
I was gonna say, yeah, it just blew the balloon, filled it with more things, because part of the I don't want to say the problem, because it's not a problem, but you, as we talked about in the temperamental video, you're a glow yellow. You're yellow, yellow, yellow. But on the other hand, you're a real strong red. So, given those two attributes, you want to please people, but you want to be bossy.
I want it
So
done my
that's
way.
right.
Yeah,
So those, you have some significantly competing
yes.
forces. And me,
Hmm.
on the other hand, I just want it done the way I want it done, and I don't really care about pleasing people. I don't really like people that much. So, but you can see what happens when you don't have margin in
Hmm.
your life. Then you end up exhausted,
Yes.
and the things and and the things that you're doing. I'm not saying that they're not all good things, but they're not all the best use of your time.
Now, this is just about margins in general, not about Cindy's flaws, correct? I'm
Well,
teasing. I'm
no,
teasing.
no, no.
We have to
Well,
have some laughter here, or we'd both be
crying.
curled up crying.
Yeah. Well, because the thing is you and I have talked about this
Yes,
margin thing
we have.
for 9 months now, 10 months, and so
Who's counting?
so I was like, I was grateful that you wrote in the time because you're such a busy person, and that was it. Part of the reason this is scheduled for today is you told me your calendar where you were flitting from here to there, and I thought, if I don't last her in now, we'll never see her till till winter.
Okay, I'm really sad, aren't I? That's a
But
sad
no,
situation.
no, because the
Uh,
beauty part of that is you, seriously, seriously. She can go into a store and she comes out and they're besties, and they have dinner together. I would never in a million years. I mean, I go into a store, I give you the money, you give me the product, I walk out. She walks out, they have relations, they're good friends. And so that's just part of who you are. And in some ways I'm a little jealous of that, because you do engage with people, but you have to recognize the downside of not building in margin
mhm,
and continuing to go on the business model that you've worked under.
mhm. That is absolutely true. The eye-opening thing for me is that at the end of the day, I collapse and just exhausted from just running myself to death and trying to do and do and do. And I did say out loud the other day, I'm being pulled in a lot of directions right now. And I never really realized that before. So thank you for at least, part of the problem is admitting you have one, right? Or part of the
Right,
answer to the
right.
problem. So it's one of those situations that um, I'm working very diligently right now to try and build in those margins. But for however many years I've been alive, 70 some years, it's never been that way for me. So it's going to take a bit. But thank you for being patient with me.
Well, but on the other hand, now this is what I do. This is just me. In the morning, I have a very regimented thing that I do, that I get scripture in my head before I get anything else in my head, and then at the end of the day, I say to myself, "No, what was scripture you learned? What did you learn from that, and did you do anything with it?" And so I would say at the end of your evenings, you have to say to yourself, let me give a laundry list of the things I've done. And then let me see where what was value added, what was time filler, what was not, didn't need to be there. And I think you can start to formulate or sift out some of the things that you see, if it happened on Monday and the same kind of thing happened on Wednesday, you're like, oh, that's kind of a time filler. And I'm not saying that every moment of every day has to be this mountaintop experience, but there are some things that we do, and this is where my margins, I have to acknowledge that, sometimes I just have so much time. I like read a book or I watch videos or something, just just to make the clock move forward, because
Mhm.
my life is very different from yours, in as far as I don't have as many activities to keep me, to keep my mind occupied. And when I stopped doing Bible studies, I mean, that took up a huge part of my
Yes, it did.
week, because I
Hmm.
had the three classes and I did study and I read books and I prepared for those. And once those didn't happen, then that left a big vacuum.
Right.
And I filled it with, just reading books, and I've read, I read a lot of books. But again, margins, it is more than just the white space. It understanding that good things need to be in that white space.
Yes. Yes.
So how best do we come about now? Now we can see what happens if we don't have margins in our life.
Right.
Then you're just ragged. You run from morning
Yes.
to night,
Hmm.
and when you look back, you're like, I don't know how much of that I accomplished
Hmm.
anything.
Hmm.
And especially for believers,
Right.
that's the bigger
Yes, it is.
that's the bigger thing, where we need to incorporate these things that are firm anchors, or hangers, that we can balance everything else off of. And that's tough.
It is tough. It is tough. And the more I learn and the more I grow in my faith, the more I realize that I have not left enough margin in order to just be still and know that He is God and let Him tell me what He thinks or He wants me to do in my life. And maybe that was part of the issue with me too. Um, I was running away from having to listen to that because, sometimes you don't want to hear those things. But I have actually started what you had talked about. I start my mornings every morning just sitting with God and talking to Him and mostly talking. And I have to admit that mostly talking. But sometimes I'll stop and try to let Him do His thing in my heart
Hmm.
because I know He can. It's just, am I going to be willing to open up to it?
Well, because when our mutual friend Deirdre and I were talking about margins, she had she started off, well, she had some fabulous ideas, and I thought, well, geez, you should be doing this one then, because you really sound. But she was talking about how to set goals and how to know what's important. And I said, first we have to recognize that we need to build in those margins,
Mhm.
because unless we have the recognition that we need to make some changes, then more time just elapses. Because Satan really wants us to not get this right. He really wants
That's
us
it.
to be just like you, busy, 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 busy,
Hmm.
and or it doesn't really matter. I have plenty of time. I'll do that later. And so both are wrong.
Hmm.
And so, with the power of the Spirit, we can pray, well, how best can we change this?
Hmm.
And I know for me, again, I have some things that I do, every morning. I listen to a 10-minute thing called Bible Recap, and then I listen to a message, and then I do my 3 devotionals. And again, that's a lot of scripture I'm sticking in my head. And I don't want to end the day and just have heard those things. I want to take what I've learned and
Right.
do something with it. That's the more difficult part,
Yes, it is.
because I can say, well, I've stuck an hour's worth of scriptural stuff in my head, because then I do my 2 Bible readings. I have 2 different versions of the Bible that I'm going through. But again, at the end of the day, if it was all just stuff that went in one ear and out the other, then I've just consumed the hour
Yes.
without actually using it, feeding on it. I've consumed it, but I haven't done anything with that information.
Well, the one thing that I am appreciating a great deal right now is the wake up call, and they are going through the a piece of scripture that is just they're tearing it apart piece by piece by piece by piece, and I never did that before. I never looked at a scripture and I just would read it and go on, read it and go on, read it and go on, and hope that I was going to get something out of it, or God was going to tell me to do something through that somehow, and just move on. But they're breaking it down piece by piece and talking about each thing to a significant amount of time to that one little piece of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that is teaching me that how to actually read a scripture. And have I put it into practice yet? No, I'm listening to the wake up call. But at least, again, I'm aware.
Well, and when I was in seminary, one of the very first classes I had was Introduction to the Bible and how to read the Bible. And he told us 4 things. You had to observe, interpret, correlate, and apply.
Hmm.
And so he said, now I'm gonna have you take this verse, and I'm gonna have you write out observations. And it was a very common verse; everybody would know it. And he goes, I want you to write out 50 observations. And I was like, there's only 20 words. What are you talking about? And so I did it. And then he said, now write out 50 more. And I'm like, you're ridiculous. And I did it. And then by the end of it, I had wrote out 124 observations about this one scripture. And so I started to look at all the scriptures differently. And if,
Hmm.
in seminary, the big thing was is if you didn't observe correctly, then your interpretation would be wrong. You would spend more time on interpreting something you didn't observe correctly, so you would have already started the process, and so I think that, to your point of the wake up call, is that they're showing you that these scriptures, because when you gloss over scripture
Hmm.
and you think, I've got all that, but if you don't really dig into it deep and think about all the ins and outs and what came before, what came after it, then you're doing yourself a disservice.
Absolutely. And I recognize that. It's just a matter of figuring out how to put that into practice.
Well, and the bigger thing is our flesh really doesn't want us to do that.
No.
Our flesh wants to. That's going to be uncomfortable. I'm going to have to learn something I didn't want to know, and it's going to give you the pushback. Whereas the spirit is like, take the time, be quiet, sit still, and we're like, but I'm a very busy person, And so again, who is
Busy
talking?
means important, you
Busy
know?
means important, and that is exactly right. Busy
Yes.
means important.
Hmm.
And if
Yeah.
I can show you all the things I've done, and that was another thing in the wake up call. If I can show you all the things I've done, I will show you how important I am
Yeah.
in the body of God. And God's like, I don't really need your help here,
Right.
and so we have a harder time with that.
Yes.
So when you think about the margins that you would
Mhm.
like to incorporate in your life, what do you think are some of the key things that you need to do or you can do to help remedy the situation?
Oh, that is therein lies most of the problem right there. How do you go about building that in? And for me, I was always a calendar person. Everything was on my calendar. Every meeting, every phone call, every item that I needed to prep for, whatever it was that I was going to go through
Mm-hmm.
in the business world. So for me, I think that would be the important first step for me, to put it on my calendar and say this particular time is going to be devoted to building in the margin that I need to have some downtime. That's the way I'm looking at it right now. And then once I learn from that, I think I will be given what the next step needs to be given after that, whatever that next step is.
My husband, he loved his paper Franklin planner, and every year we go to the Franklin planner store, and I'm like, you know what that costs? We could just buy a notebook. And he's like, no, we have to have this because it had the calendars and all the pre stuff in there. And he loved his phone, but man, that
Mhm.
Franklin. In fact, when he died, there was a whole desk full of all the Franklin planners. And if
Wow.
you would have said, what did he have for lunch on this day? Oh, it's right
Oh,
there.
right here.
So he's a lot like you in that, because you like to do that.
Mhm.
But I think you're right. The first step is in saying, like, because I do in my morning before I get into the world, I need to get in the scripture,
Mhm.
and so I built that in, and I notice how differently my day goes when I don't start it with scripture, when I don't
Yes.
start it with that formula, and I start, well, I'll just start reading this book now or whatever, and the whole day shifts because I haven't started on the foundation.
Right.
So,
And
but
I'll allow distractions even in that first part of my day. I allow distractions. That's, confession right here. So that's another thing I have to make certain that I do. I don't allow distractions when I have that time set aside.
well, and you know, I'll tell you a story about my sister. She used to be in the fire department, and every Sunday morning, she wasn't scheduled to be in the fire department because she was going to go to church. And she said, "Oh, it always happens. Just before I'm going out the door, the tones ring or whatever she
Mm-hmm.
said, and I go off to do the fire thing." And I said, "Well, until you make that a commitment that you're going to go to church regardless," I said, Satan, I'll just make sure that every morning, every Sunday morning at 7:45, you get a fire call. And I said, but church only happens once a week. So you need to say this is more important than that. And then I'm not telling anybody how to put the margins in their life,
Right.
but you need to say this is a hard and fast rule. And Satan will love to tempt you with,
Yeah.
it's only this one time. You just take the phone call just this one time, and you'll get back to the other. And how many times I'm going to read my Bible every morning, and then by night, oh, I forgot to read my Bible. And as you're sitting there with your eyes blurring, getting sleepy, I'll read it again tomorrow, and then tomorrow, it's like how many times, like if you're sick and you miss church,
Right.
and then the second Sunday I missed it again. And by the third Sunday, you can't even remember why church is important. I mean, it just all slips away so a little bit at a time.
It does. It does. And the one thing that I have found is that we are not fighting against political parties. We're not fighting against things that are happening in our world, against people and things. We're fighting against the evil that's in this world. And it's a good and evil battle that has been going on from day one. And as much as you will turn over and allow that evil to come into your life, that's exactly what he wants. And that's when that margin, it just slips away.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
that's really what I've been telling myself every day, trying to get to that point to make certain that I do build in that time and not be pulled in a million different directions, and not allow myself to be pulled in a million different directions because I'm just way too important. These people need me. No, they don't.
Well, but I'll tell you the truth, because Cindy is my she's my executive assistant, and she, and she's really not is the assistant. She's the executive. She, she finds all my pictures and she schedules all the Blind Zone episodes. And so I launched a website, blindspotstories.com, and my web designer couldn't post. And I thought, oh, I wonder if Cindy would do that. But then I'm the problem too. Just because you're capable, I don't get to dump on you and just be like, well, it's only going to take 10 minutes a week, because then I help fill up your calendar. And I recognize it in myself that if I can't do it, then I have to ask somebody. I can't keep asking the same people over and over, because you do a tremendous amount of stuff for me for the Blind Zone. And I don't want to overwhelm you. But on the other hand, I've been the one saying, you need to build some margins in your life. Except for when I ask you, then, skip that whole part. Because you have lots of friends, you have lots of interests, you have lots of other people that are competing for your time.
Well, but I mean, that okay. No one else can do it as well as I can, right? No, I'm teasing. I am really teasing. I promise.
She is not. She's really good at this. But the point is you have to pick the priority.
Mm-hmm.
And since well, since I
One
think
has to pick the priority. It's not, I think, just on me, but everyone
everybody, that's right.
has to.
That's
Mm-hmm.
well, and again, I feel that the spirit told me to do the Blind Zone and blindspotstories.com, the website. So I think that that's super important.
Yes, it
But
is.
just because it's important to me, I don't get to press that out into other people who are, not as inclined. Now, thankfully, you and the other Cindy and Deirdre, they've all, you've all supported and, backed me up on this, because, you can see that this is where I was supposed to go. But again, my dilemma shouldn't become your problem.
Well, it's never been a problem, and you know that.
But again, recognizing
yes.
that other people who are impinging on your margins,
I just have to kick somebody else out.
that's right. So you'll be like Jesus, and you have the close three, and then
That's right.
the other
Just
nine,
go away.
you're not as important. So
No, I have learned so much from this woman. It's incredible, and I am very thankful for that. And I continue to learn, and I'm not going to turn my back on that.
well, but again, before we started taping this, you said, "How do you think this is going to go?" And I said, "Oh, not well. This is going to be painful for both of us. We're both
Yeah.
going to have to come to some truths that."
Yes. Yeah.
And again, until you hear yourself say it, you almost turn. Who said that? Oh, that was
Where's that
me.
from?
Yeah, where'd that come from?
Yeah.
So anyway, let's. So what about the margins? What do you think? How best are you going to accomplish this?
I I believe, and I have been trying to do this week anyway, is to put on my calendar a time to just do nothing. And not that it was always filled up with something, but I'm taking the time to set aside uh, an area of time in a day that is just for nothing. And if it gets filled up, it gets filled up. But for me, that's going to be my nothing time. And then that's when I can sit down and try to listen and discern the voice of God,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which is something that you promised that you would help me with.
That's true. And here's where I have to, tell on other people. I've told a couple people, now if you want to do that, you just work out the time and call me. And I've never heard back from any of them, because their lives are so busy. It's like, wow. But again, I can't be the arbiter of somebody else's calendar.
No.
And so if it's because they'll have to come to the decision that's important enough for me to make that time.
And you know what she's saying, Cindy? You come up with the time and I'll help you. Okay.
I think that's true.
I think that's it.
That's right. Well, because one of my favorite books is The Whole Bible Story
Yes.
in Plain English by Dr. William Marty.
Mm-hmm.
And I put out a 24-week course on that I've taught many, many times. I love that book. And somebody said, "Oh, I'd really like to do that." And I said, "Well, it takes 24 weeks. Oh, well, I don't have that kind of time. And I'm like, 24 weeks are going to come and go. And at least at the end of it, you'll have read through the Bible in a different format and you might have had some takeaways. But again, I think part of the problem with today's day and age is we lead such a busy, busy, busy life. And I don't think we recognize the valuelessness of some of what we've stuffed in our day.
And another thing that sticks in my mind now, and it never did before, was, does this activity have an eternal consequence, or is it just something that I need to do for myself or somebody else? And I mean, some of it crosses over, but even the fact that I would think in those terms is something different for me. So I'm grateful for having that in my mind to say, okay, is this going to make a difference in eternity? Most of the things aren't that I've involved myself with, but how do you build in that margin?
Well, because my sister and I talked about this too, that she was in a situation, and I said, 150 years from now, when you're standing next to Jesus, is this going to be the thing that he talked about? Or whatever you're discussing, does it have eternal ramifications, or how you dealt with it was more flesh driven and you caused a bigger problem? And so that's how I evaluate things now. What is the eternal perspective?
Yes.
What is the fleshly perspective? Am I feeding my appetite, or am I feeding my integrity? And that is really sifted out a lot of the non sequiturs, the things that just really, don't have that much validity.
Right.
But again, I spend a lot of time reading books that are of no eternal value, but they take up time, and
entertaining.
So they're entertaining, and
Entertaining.
and
We
some
have
of
to do that. So
that's right. And but Oswald Chambers in his series, he said you can't read all theology without anything else, because then you're slanted as well. As long as the other stuff you're reading isn't poison, then there's a balance to be had. Yes. So is there anything else you want to add before we wrap this up, now that I've bludgeoned you pretty soundly here?
I have to go take some knives out of my bag.
I was thinking that as I was talking. The old psycho story.
It's stuff that we all need to hear, and especially in the kind way that we can laugh about it and that we can have these conversations, but we know that the seriousness of it is really for our own good, and what we're going to do. So yes, it's all good. It's all good stuff, and I appreciate you allowing me to get this out in the open. And now whoever's going to be listening to this will know all my flaws.
Not all. We don't have enough time for that. But again, I remember when I was in school and we had to write a paper, and I didn't have enough content. So I would make the margins bigger and I would make the font larger, and I'd be like, I'm fooling nobody here. The professor's like, okay, I see we didn't have enough. And but again, we have to recognize where we stop and where we start in the process, and the things that are important, and literally write them into our calendars.
Yes.
Because the eternal value of what we do here is important. And if we don't make the time, like Jesus did, he went away to a quiet place, and like God said, I'll give you do whatever you want the other 6 days. Well, not whatever you want, but you get the gist. And take one day and set it aside. He set up a standard and a staple that I think we've gotten to be too self-important. That I'm sure he didn't mean that. I'm sure he didn't mean me. Not for me. Yeah. Anyway. So this has
Thank
been
you.
fabulous
It
fun,
has.
and
See, it didn't go as poorly as I think that you expected, but we'll
well,
see.
it traveled on a lot of roads that I didn't anticipate coming on, but that's how these things go. I
Yes,
we every before I tape any of the Blind Zone episodes, I pray with whoever's here or by myself with my production manager, and I just say, give me the opportunity to speak the words you want me to say, and to have it be a message that whoever's listening needs to hear. And I think that
yes,
that worked out very well
it
today for
did.
this.
It did. Thank you again.
You're welcome. So I think next time I get to beat up my other friend Cindy. I'm kidding, but yeah, I think my other friend Cindy is going to come, and we're going to be talking about gifts. And for those of you who have been patiently waiting for Dr. Richards to come back to talk about grief, I unfortunately caught a cold and wasn't able to film that episode, but he will be back very shortly. And that's another thing, like at the beginning of this episode that I said, just forgive me these things. I'm trying to work them out as I go. It's not a perfect world, but I'm trying the hardest I can. And it's thanks to people like Cindy and my production manager and Thus that it comes off as cleanly as it does. So again, thank you for
Thank
today,
you. Thank you.
and we will see you next week
Mhm.
on the Blind Zone.